Podcast by Friday, episode 45.
I was just figuring out a way to solve a problem that somebody else had and, giving them a solution. That's all it was in every case. I mean, I wasn't, I came up with the original design for the airplane, but the business part of it, that was just in response to what people were saying. They were like, wow, that's really nice. Could you give me this? Wow, that's really nice, but could you give me that? And I'd say, I don't know. I'll see. That's really, if you think about it, Kingsley, that's what all business is finding out what the problem is somebody has and giving them a solution.
Podcast by Friday with Bill Griggs and Kingsley Grant. We help people to create their minimal viable podcast by taking bold action to beat procrastination to get their voices heard.
In today's episode, you're going to hear me do an interview of my co-host, Bill Griggs. As you have heard at the very beginning, that was just a part of what it is he shared in this up close and personal interview I had with him. We discussed all kinds of topics, from how he got started, his model airplanes, kind of business, and just a number of other things that you're going to be in for a treat as you listen to this interview. And without further ado, let's dive right into the interview with Bill Griggs as I ask him some very interesting questions that you might have wanted to ask him if you met him. So let's kind of find out more about who my co-host is, Mr. Bill Griggs. Bill, it's great being behind the microphone once again, especially for this episode, because I am looking forward to this special episode for a number of reasons. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Kingsley. I have having an interesting time today, and I'm really looking forward to sharing with our listeners about how they can go about building their minimum viable podcast.
And you know what I like is that we have kind of introduced a concept throughout our several episodes, and that is about how we do interview for guests on our show as one way for that person who's aspiring to be a new podcaster can really think about the different approaches, whether they do a solo show or an interview type show. And what we want to demonstrate again today is what an interview type show looks like. So I'm looking forward to this because I will be interviewing you, and so our listeners can hear a little bit more about your backstory. Who is this Bill Griggs that they hear from week to week?
Yeah, it's always a challenging thing when you're in an interview podcast, because either as the interviewer or as the interviewee, it's not difficult because it's basically a conversation between two people. The fun part is trying to find out information about the other person that you didn't know before, and that's always a challenge, and it's always fun, and hopefully it's entertaining.
Yeah, I know. I think what I want to kind of even point out here is that, as you just described, I was trying to find out information about the guest, but I think it's as it relates, which I think what you're pointing out is that as it relates to the audience. So you know your audience and what your audience need. So you're going to probe and look for questions that you're hopefully your audience can have a takeaway from. What is it they can learn or get from the interview as it may relate to their situation, which I think I like about even what we're going to do today is trying to remember that, okay, what might our audience be thinking, or what question they might have that they would like to ask Bill, and I'm asking on their behalf.
Well, Kingsley, when you take off a Band-Aid, it's probably easiest if you just rip it off quick
and go
slow.
Well, let's rip it off right now. So you've been doing podcasting for some time, and our listeners may not know how you got into podcasting. So what was it that led you into this this modality, this way of getting content out?
Oh, I started listening to podcasts before I ever thought about producing my own podcast. I came across podcasts kind of in a pivotal time in my life, just prior to my mother's passing. And, I discovered podcasts and started looking into them. And it was as a result of the trip that I was taking that I got into podcasting.
So did you know of podcasting before? Why? Because I find some people, you mentioned the word podcast and they said, podcast? What is that? So how did you initially hear about podcasts?
Well, I had heard about podcast online. Someone mentioned it inside of a blog one day, and said, there's a podcast was an audio recording that you listen to where somebody told you more information about her blog. And so I started looking around. I had just gotten an iPad, and when I got the iPad, it had the ability to download these podcasts. And so the first thing I did was I started looking, through a web browser, and I finally located some of them. And I was kind of interested in business at the time. And I discovered the first podcast that I ever heard was by Leo Laporte. And it was, I think it was the iPad Today or the iTunes Today or something like that. At any rate, trying to learn more about this iPad, and I started listening to that, and that inside of that podcast, he discussed other podcasters and shows that they had, and that kind of led me over to find the Internet Business Mastery podcast, which is the one that really got me going.
So you mentioned about pivotal point, Bill. So the pivotal point was your mother's illness or her death, or was there some other things you were also pivoting from or pivoting to?
Yeah, my mom was very important in my life. She was very, very good woman. She is the one who molded me into the person I am today, and the way that I think and do things and everything. And she had been ill for a while. And when she passed away, we had to drive all the way from where we lived here in upstate New York down to Arkansas, where we were going to lay her to rest. And I didn't, we were taking a van of us down to the funeral, and I really didn't want to talk to anybody. I was kind of upset. I was, beside myself. So I decided that I would load up a bunch of podcast episodes onto my iPad and listen to them on the way down. And so the one I chose to download was Internet Business Mastery. And I loaded up a whole bunch of those. And on the way down, I started listening to them. And there were two that stuck out to me, two episodes that stuck out to me. There was one that interviewed Jeff Walker, who does at the time he was doing a series about how he launches a product on the internet. And the other one was an interview with Pat Flynn. And Pat Flynn was an architect who got laid off and then decided that he would start a blog talking about his niche, which was taking a green exam, which is an architectural thing for a style of buildings to design. But he was a common guy who went out and took a skill that he had and wrote about it, and then people ended up paying him to take his exam course. And as I'm thinking about the two in combination, I'm like, wow, this is it. I was in a point in my life where I was struggling. I had just completed 27 years of a job, and I was eligible to retire. And I was trying to figure out what it was I wanted to do.
Do you mind sharing what you were doing at the time as far as work-wise, or you want to talk about in general about what that was like, or?
Well, I don't generally talk a whole lot about it because, but I was dealing in cases that involved abused children. Okay.
And for 27 years you did that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, for the last 4 years of my job, that was the assignment that I had. But, I've done other general things prior to that. And, it can be depressing, and it can also be rewarding because you're rescuing kids from, really bad situations. But there are times when it is really, it sucks the life out of you at some point. And so I was ready to move on to something different.
Okay, I'm going to pause for a second because you said, I don't want to go too far from what you said earlier. You said earlier that, you had a business, it was business oriented. You wanted to do some kind of business. I want to kind of walk back to some degree, walk back some here. Do you find, when did that idea that you wanted to be in business, because you did a job for 27 years, which is not really a business that you were doing for yourself. When did you first realize you wanted to be in business? And was there something that came out of your upbringing, say, with your family? Was anybody business-oriented that kind of sparked that in you, or how did it come about?
Oh, goodness, Kingsley. Folks have been entrepreneurial in my family for years. I just don't know, if we ever called it that. I mean, my grandparents used to go out to the farm fields. They lived in an area where peaches were grown for Gerber, down in Arkansas. And so what they would do is, as the workers would go out to the field, they had snacks and water and things like that, and they would drive their truck out there, and that's what they would do. They would sell that stuff to the people out in the field, and so that's how they made their living in addition to the farming that they were doing on their own. So that was one example. My father, I just found out about many of the things that he was doing when I was younger and wasn't paying attention. But at one point he owned a store, and another point he had a restaurant, and things. He just, did these things that I just took for granted. Yeah. He was a minister, and I assumed many of the things that he was doing were just related to the church, and in most cases they were. But I didn't realize that he was. I just you're a kid, you're not paying attention, you don't realize just how many things your parents do. So that sort of thing. I mean, I had my first paper out when I was like 8 or 9 years old.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So you actually started this whole, we call it now, into the entrepreneurial, but you were in that business thing from very early, doing transactions like that, paper route. You saw your dad. Now, you had, did you have other siblings at the same time, and were they also encouraging, discouraging, or how was it as far as, seeing you having this mindset to continue to focus on that? Did you find that you were kind of proud to continue, or it was just almost like, all right, no one really paid attention to those things. It was not a big thing at the time.
Well, I guess, everyone, I was one of the younger kids in a 7-kid family. So, my oldest brother had a paper route, and the brother above me had a paper route.
Okay.
And so, we just, did what we had to do. That's the way it was back in the day. I mean, you could, if you could, you got out and you did something. So, it's funny that I'm probably the only one out of the 7 kids who's doing anything entrepreneurial now. But all the others went on to professions, doctor, there aren't any in our family. No, but we do have an attorney, and we have a career Air Force person, and technicians, and firefighters, and a teacher, and my sister was a court reporter, and just that's they did things, and it's just always been a part of the work ethic. You go out and you do something.
But one thing that you mentioned about your, and this is like because we have had this relationship for some time, that your dad saw where you really was a person who wanted to do a lot of things, a number of things, and he would say to you, Bill, if you could only focus on one. So, what were the many things you were involved in or wanted to do that your dad would have to say to you if you were? You can tell me what the statement was, so our listeners can hear how your dad kind of spoke to something he saw, but is calling you into focus. What was it? What was going on at that time?
Oh goodness! When I was a child, I was all over the place. I was doing all sorts of things. I was a musician, so I marched in the drum and bugle corps, and I was into track and field, and I was always competing in that. I played in football. I was doing a junior achievement program, which is a little business thing, which I had forgotten about until just this moment. So I was constantly going, and I had come to my father one day, and I said to him, Dad, I want to, I tell him about the things that were going on, and I says, well, I just can't wait. I want to try that. I want to do that. This is really cool. And my father chuckled, and he laughed, and he says, son, you're a shotgun. He says, you hit a little bit of everything you aim at. If you ever become an arrow, you'll be dangerous. And that was his way of telling me that I needed to focus on something and to do one thing. And that advice stuck with me because it kind of set a path, because if you are a person who is fortunate enough to be able to do lots of things, you have to really take the time to choose which things that you will focus on and, go after them and do it. And, it's hard to do that. I got the, the syndrome where, you see
the shiny.
Shiny, you look at it and say, oh, look, squirrel, but, that's me. So I try a lot of different things, and it's evident when you look at the things that I've done in the past. My first business wasn't an online business, so my first side hustle was actually making model airplanes and kits and things like that. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, was the internet was just getting started. So, yeah. Yeah,
you're one of the founders. Remember, you're one of the founders of the internet.
Kind of like that, yeah. So I started I've been passionate about model airplanes since I was like 12. I think this kid brought a magazine into my homeroom class that had pictures of model airplanes, and I got excited about it, and I asked him if I could borrow it, and I actually still have that magazine somewhere.
Wow.
He never got it back. Sorry about that, Herb. But that started me off on the stream. My father bought me a model airplane kit when I graduated junior high school. And that got me started. And, next thing you know, I was building radio-controlled airplanes and that sort of thing. I always wanted to be an engineer. If you asked me when I was a kid what I wanted to do, I wanted to be a scientist or an astronaut or an engineer. And I didn't quite have the math skill concentration for that, but, I did have the talent for it. And so I was designing and building model airplanes, and I was getting pretty good at it. And I built a little racer plane, this tiny, and nobody had seen anything like it here. And I showed it at one of the model airplane meets that I used to go to, and somebody says, "Wow, that's really cool. Do you have any plans for that?" And I said, "Well, I got the drawings that I made when I made it, but I don't really have plans." But so I went back to my workshop and drew up some plans. And the next time I went out, I had a few blueprints printed up of this design. And for $5 or whatever it was, I sold them a set of plans, out of the trunk of my car. And those all guys were saying, "Hey, that's great, but can you make this certain part of the plane? That's kind of hard to make. Can you make that for us?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, maybe." And I went back and I figured out how to make that part, and I started offering that. And then I went back and folks said, "Well, that's great, but I kind of want the entire kit. Is there any way you could make the entire kit?"
Wow.
And so I went back and figured out how to make the kit and started selling kits. And it didn't end there, though, because now that they had the kit, they wanted all the parts that went with the kit. And so that's how I ended up building up unintentionally a model airplane manufacturing business. And,
And didn't you at one point also bring that online, or how did you get people who were not, say, local and who may have shown interest? Did they also? How did you able to service those people?
Well, I at the time was here we go again being a shotgun because of the popularity of this plane and some others that I had. You got to remember, this is the early 90s. My planes were electrically powered, which if you say that now, everybody's, yeah, all planes are electrically powered. But no, back in the day, they were all little planes that ran off of model airplane fuel and had, a little glow plug, and you had to connect a battery to it to flip it over, and it made noise and smoke and the whole 9 yards. Well, electric planes were rare back in the 90s, and I was one of the first guys making them. But I hope I'm getting back around to your question. When I started making those, I got asked to write for a magazine. And because of my exposure in that magazine with my airplane designs, people started writing to me, asking about, the planes that I described. And so I took an ad out in the magazine that I was offering these kits, and people began sending me money for plans through the mail.
Wow.
What a concept. You go out to the mailbox, open it up, and there's an envelope in it with a few dollars in it. People would send a $5 bill in the mail, or they would send you a check or whatever, and you'd send them the thing. And so it was really kind of interesting. You're not doing it, you did the work earlier, but, people are paying you for that. And so that's how it first started. I was getting those results from that ad that I had placed, and I decided, this internet thing is really kind of cool. I was always into tech. And the internet provider I had offered a free website with your hosting. And so I figured out how to put one up, and it was just a page with, I think it was Bill Griggs models or something like that on it. And then, a picture of the airplane and, where they could order. And back in the day, somebody wanted something that I had. They would go to that website, they'd see the address, and they'd send me money in the mail. Okay, and they get their airplane plans. And, this went on, and it turned into a nice little income stream. But then I said, I was getting letters from people. They said, "Boy, I wish you had some way of taking a credit card."
Wow.
And then, so I had to go and figure that out. And back in the day, you had to go to a bank and get set up as a merchant account and all of that. And I figured out how to do it. And when I put up a button on that site on how to accept credit cards, my business tripled.
Wow.
Almost immediately. And so, there I was with a website and, my model airplane kits. And then I started adding accessories and things like that and put that out. And it had gotten to the point where it's about 70 grand a year coming from that alone. And
that's a lot of money back then.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah. So, and to everybody around you, it appears as if you're doing nothing, but you've got that little business going. And so,
at that time, Bill, I ask this question here because I find sometimes a person who's even listening right now and is in this journey, and they don't, if you're doing all of that, and some people around you, you just said, is not recognizing and think you're doing nothing. Did you have, like, say, a support system with the family or otherwise who kind of helped you or kind of encouraged you, or you felt you needed to do this because of them? What was happening at that season of your life as far as relationally and the whole idea of encouragement, or because we know at times that can be an issue.
Well, it was obvious to everyone involved that there was something in the family that we were generating some funds, but this was a side job. This was something that I was doing on the side just to raise a little money. But we had kids helping us pack airplanes. Kids from the religious organization we belonged to. They were young, and it's nothing dangerous or anything. They'd come over and they'd stick a box, fold up a box for me and put the parts in, and I organize them, and it taught them how to.
That's exciting.
Yeah. And it was fun. And then we'd feed them and we'd pay them and the whole nine yards.
You had a business, a team around you. That's I'm really just fascinated by that because my imagination is going wild now watching that whole. It's almost like a factory type of setting where you're putting parts together, packaging, and it's a full blown business on the side.
Well, yeah, it's not quite as glamorous as that.
No, but it has it has an element of that.
Yes, it does. Had I known what I was doing, I was just figuring out a way to solve a problem that somebody else had, and giving them a solution. That's all it was. In every case, I mean, I wasn't. I came up with the original design for the airplane, but the business part of it, that was just in response to what people were saying. They were like, "Wow, that's really nice. Could you give me this? Wow, that's really nice, but could you give me that?" And I'd say, "I don't know. I'll see." That's really, if you think about it, Kingsley, that's what all business is finding out what the problem is somebody has and giving them a solution.
I have a friend, Bill, who have said, of him, Dan Miller. He said, if a person asks you a question 3 times, he says, that's a product. Go and create a product for that because it means others are asking the same question as well. So, I mean, you've demonstrated, Bill, so far, as I listened, your ability to figure things out, make things, put things together. And I think which is relate to this place where you are because you have the master maker's guide, master person that does things, even today. Because what you're doing today, basically, other than the podcast we're on right now, kind of tell, how did you, well, I mean, not how, obviously how you got to this place, but you figured that you're good at making things and figuring things out. So you got into, once you retired, you moved from not just sitting home in a rocking chair, just every single day. You went into doing something else that still continued this whole idea of figuring things out and creating things. What is that, and how did that come about?
Well, I ended that model airplane business, when my son was born. There were some issues that he was having health-wise, and I just said, I haven't got time to focus on this. I just stopped it. It was very funny to the people who were looking. They didn't understand why I had stopped. And I wanted to focus on what was important to me, was family. Well, thankfully, everything around my son turned out fine, and no issues. Everything. He's a healthy 18-year-old now, but I always wondered in the back of my mind, wow, I had this thing going. Can I do it again? Was that a fluke? Did it? I really enjoyed it. I liked having a business. Could I do it again if I tried? That is kind of what happened. I always had that feeling, and I'd like to do something like that again. Because I look back at, some of the guys who started internet companies at about the same time that I did with the model airplane things, who were into model airplane stuff. One of these guys owns a network of websites, forum-style websites that are, making him crazy money. I mean, man owns full-scale aerobatic aircrafts and flies around competing in Red Bull stuff and things like that. So, it's really crazy. And I said, gee, where would I have been? But, it's always one of those things. You always wonder, if you don't take your shot, what did you miss as a result of that? Where could you have gone? What could you have accomplished? And this was kind of that feeling going on in my mind as I'm getting ready to retire. I'm fairly young to be retired. I retired in my 40s because I had a state job that, I could leave after 20 years. So I did 27 instead. But, I was still young, too young to completely stop doing stuff.
Very much so. When I heard you retire, I said, gotta get out of here. Retire. You don't even look like a person who just started working yet.
Well, thank you. So I'm trying to remember what your original question was, Kingsley, but
the idea about what you're doing today, how this have all led to what you're doing today, and because of how you're demonstrating, you're figuring things out, making things, and today you are.
Well, as I'm driving along, we're getting back to my mom's funeral. On this funeral, I had this epiphany from listening to the podcast that people were capable of making money online, and there was a system in place to do so. And many of them were using podcast as the basis of that. And it was like I heard my mom's voice said, as we're driving, I knew you could. And, that was it. It was kind of, I know this sounds woo-woo and frou-frou and whatever, but that's really what happened in my moment of emotional need. I had been searching for what it was I wanted to do, and I figured it out. And, I heard my mother's voice telling me, that. So I joined as soon as we got back from that trip, I joined the Internet Business Mastery Academy and took some money out of my retirement account to purchase the course and just, popped it down. Unfortunately, at the time, the course didn't quite live up to what I was expecting compared to their podcast episode. There weren't as many people inside the course as I was led to believe from the recordings and everything. And so I was faced with a choice. What do I do if I'm interested in this? And you'd see somebody come inside of the group. They'd say, "Hey, I'm all excited. I want to start this. I want to do things." And then that would be it. You'd never hear from them again. And I could follow that path, or I could take a different path. And so I said, you know what? One of the first things that they say you have to do is get into a mastermind and talk with other like-minded people. And I'm going to form one of those. And so I posted there that I was looking to start a mastermind group. And I kept at it for a few weeks. And I found one other guy who was interested, and together we continued to post that we were starting a mastermind, and we set a date when we were going to do it, and we got together 5 people, and we started the first mastermind meeting, and that continued for many years. We did that group for at least 5 years, 5 or 6. The members changed; they came and gone, but we worked through our desires to start businesses, and there are 2 of us from that original group who are still doing online businesses. The rest have moved on to do other things. That's kind of how it worked out. And I actually started as a blogger, writing, because I was already writing for magazines and things, writing about my interest. And when I did that, I began to wonder, because my niche is really kind of small. You would think it's going to be model airplanes, but it's not. It's here's that shotgun thing again. I'm really into what is called a CNC machine, which is a computer numeric control. That's what CNC stands for. It just means a computer's controlling a machine. And I wanted to make model airplanes, again, in a better way. And so I knew that people use these machines to make them. And so I started researching how to make these machines because I knew I couldn't afford to buy one, because at the time they were hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now you can go and buy one for $1,000 or $2,000. But back in the day, they were a very expensive thing. And so I started researching that, and the more I found information about it, I really had to dig, because it wasn't on the internet, and there were so many different sources. I started writing about what I found so that others could find the information as well, because I knew if I was having trouble looking for this information, that it must be hard to find. And my mom was always saying, that because she was a teacher, that each one of us should teach one. So you say each one teach one. And so I had this kind of belief that information that you take to the grave with you is useless information. So you got to share what you know with people. And so I started writing a blog about my CNC stuff. And then I built a Facebook group around it. And the group was growing, and it was small, but it's like anybody who's tried to build a Facebook group knows that it starts out small and takes a long time. But I expressed to the people inside the group that I wanted to start a podcast. And, there was no podcast about CNC routers. And, I began to wonder if people would listen. Well, I launched that podcast. This is how I met you, Kingsley. And in a year, we had more than doubled the size of it. And so we launched the podcast in 2015. And I'm breezing over this, but the Facebook group went from 1,000 members at that time, and now we're here we are in 2018, and we're at just over 12,000 members or so.
Wow.
So, yeah, we've had very rapid growth through that.
It's tremendous.
Yeah.
Bill, well, I think, you've kind of come full circle here with how, because I think there's one common thread I'm hearing through all of this. Well, actually, a number of points that I think are made. And as you're listening, and I hope this was really, there's so many things, lessons in this interview, Bill, that is so pertinent to a person who would want to become a podcaster or a business person or start anything, because you've shared about, you figure things out, the demand created an opportunity for you to go and say, hey, if they're asking, let me figure it out. And I've provided for them, make some money. You're just like, it's like rinse and repeat. So I've got something going. Let me do it again and do it again. And let me validate my idea. It's also mentioned here in this, the idea of, trying new things, mastermind group, just incredible principles I believe that every business person can learn from, especially as a podcaster, because they're going to go this very same journey. And you can lay it out basically some along the way, just nuggets that I think are so helpful. So you're now doing the CNC router. You have a podcast. You still have a business doing that. And this is basically now in your retired stage of life that you spend time doing. So let me ask this question. What motivates you? What keeps you going when things are, because I know in a podcaster's life or any business, sometimes you feel like, oh man, but what motivates you and keep you going? Because you're retired. You don't need to be doing this, if you just choose to. But what keeps you going?
Boy, I wish I knew the answer to that, because I jumpstart it and keep it going, push it further. It's a very good question. I don't know what drives me, Kingsley, other than the want and desire to share and to explore new things. I'm stubborn. I don't like giving up. I came so close to having a major business with the model airplane things, and I'm at that point again now with the CNC, and I'm going to keep going because I'm kind of driven to see where this will take, because because you never know. You've got to have that drive internally. If you don't have it, then I don't know how you can get it. But it is a mindset, deciding that you're not giving up. You're just going to continue. The one thing that I do think is a motivator is knowing that, for just this moment in time, for just right now, I can be an arrow if I want to, and try and see where it goes. I mean, I'm on the verge of a 6-figure business right now based off of the podcast. And to me, my original question was, can I do this again? Well, yeah, the answer, I guess, is yes, I can do it again. But there's nothing special or unique about the methods that I'm using. Everything that I've described has been done by someone before in some other aspect of life. Because I don't know who said this, but it's so true. Success leaves clues. And the really cool thing about podcasting, about entrepreneurism, about online business is if you want to know how to do something, that information is now online somewhere, or it's available through a podcast, or it's available through a YouTube video, or whatever it is. Not knowing how to do something is the excuse of the last century. It doesn't exist anymore because you can find the information. People are willing to help you. They will share with you what they know. And that's why we do Podcasts by Friday, because you and I decided that we had just started a podcast and we were having some success with our podcast on our own. But there were so many problems that people were running into when they first got started. Principal among them was procrastination, but, not knowing all the little details of, how to get it done. And so, you and I sat down together and we decided to tackle that and to put out the information that we had gained so that others could benefit. And that's why we do Podcasts by Friday. It's certainly not because of the monetary gains or anything like that, although we do appreciate every little bit of income that the podcast generates. It's more of a sharing. It's kind of a drive that you and I both share to tell others about podcasting and how much we enjoy it. And, if you enjoy something, you want to share it.
I'm sorry. It's a very, great way to come full circle by sharing that just now. I think it's such a beautiful way of demonstrating to the question I asked you, because I said, what keeps you going? And I heard inside there implied is what brought me to a book I'm reading with Brendan Burchard, and he would describe it as he called it an obsession for mastering something, and he also calls it a reckless the reckless obsession that is there, and I'm hearing that with you. But I want to kind of just read this in wrapping things up here. He says, a certain degree of insanity and recklessness is necessary to advance or innovate anything, to make any new or remarkable or meaningful contributions. What great thing was ever accomplished without a little recklessness? So-called recklessness was required for the extraordinary to happen, crossing the oceans, ending slavery, rocketing man into space, building skyscrapers, decoding the genome, starting new businesses, and innovating entire industries. It is reckless to try something that has never been done, to move against convention, to begin before all conditions are good and preparations are perfected. But the bold know that to win, one must first begin. They also deeply understand that a degree of risk is inevitable and necessary should there be any real reward. Yes, any plunge into the unknown is reckless, but that's where the treasure lies. You have found it.
Wow, that is so true. I mean, you have to be willing to put yourself out there, to take a risk, to go and go outside your comfort zone. You know, if you don't take anything else away from this interview today, it's go do something that you've not done before. Mm-hmm. Try it. You know, that's part of my old shotgun mentality, you know, wanting to do just a little bit of everything. For me, it's that curiosity. Thankfully, I'm not a cat because I'd be dead long ago. But, you know, if you've wondered about something, if you've thought about doing something, give it a shot. What have you got to lose? I mean, if it's a failure at first, then you've found one way that it doesn't work. Mm. The real test is, will you try a different way to see if that will work? And if that doesn't work, will you try another way and another? That's what I think separates the people who do and achieve things from those who just talk about it. They're willing to go out and fail fast, you know, to go out and try something and then try something different. That's all. And anybody can do this. If you've been sitting back at home thinking that you want to do a podcast and you're afraid, don't be. Chances are nobody will hear your first episode anyway, so you might as well put it out there. It's your second episode that's the real key.
You know, there's two quotes that I know I'm going to kind of mess this one up, but I think it's important that Zig Ziglar says, anything worth doing is worth doing at the beginning, worth doing poorly until you learn how to do it well. Mm-hmm. And then Mel Robbins, she says it this way, you know, try something, go after it. What's the worst that can happen? Well, you're either going to succeed or you're going to survive. Mm-hmm.
I tell you, if you haven't read either of those two people, or listened to them on an audiobook, Zig Ziglar and Mel Robbins are two great examples of people. They're great storytellers. They know exactly how to get their point across. They're really good people to listen to. You know, that's one thing I recommend highly. Read, listen, educate. Go find somebody that you like who's doing what it is that you want to do, and listen to them, because they'll tell you how they're doing it, and it's up to you to just go out and take that first step, then the second, and the third, and you can get there.
You know, I think, Bill, I again want to say thank you for sharing your life and sharing your story with us, because I think I've learned some things that I've known you for quite a while, but I've learned some things and discovered some things in this interview I did not know before. And our audience who have listened to your voice have now heard some parts of your life they did not know before. So I appreciate you taking the time to share that with us and really giving us such a very insightful view, but also some incredible business principles that we can learn from. And as Zig Ziglar would again say, you don't have to be great to start, but you must start to be great. Bill have kind of laid out today a challenge. So I challenge you now as you're listening. What will you start? Because if you don't start, you'll never have greatness. So start today. That's our challenge to you. And we look forward to hearing from you as to what you did. So here's how we're asking you to do. Join us in our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/podcast by Friday. Or you could email us, which I would love for an email to come to Bill or myself about this episode, to podcast@podcastbyfriday.com. I would love to hear your words as you share about what this meant to you. And if you want to do it where it's not seen by everyone, but seen by us, use the email. If not, just do that in the group. So I want to say thank you for taking the time to listen to us and hear Bill's story. And I hope you're challenged, inspired, motivated, and you can't wait to get started because of what you heard today. Bill, thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome, Kingsley. These episodes where, the last episode where I got the chance to interview you taught me so much about you that I didn't know. And I know for a fact that there are things that came up in today's interview that had not come up before.
Not at all.
And that's the mark of a good interview. And that's the mark of a good interviewer. And, I really appreciate your skill and talent in bringing these things out. This is kind of like being on a hot seat.
Yes.
You never know where it's going to go. Yeah. I really do appreciate those who've listened and to hear, a little bit of my story. And, you didn't get the whole thing. Everybody's story is like an onion.
Oh, yes.
There's different layers to it. But maybe that will encourage you, if you found what I had to talk about to be interesting, to ask a question or to join us in a Facebook group or send us an email. Anyway, we'd love to hear from you. And I think I'm going to stop talking now. And,
I was going to say to them, stick around. We don't want to give you everything in this one episode. Stick around. Stay with us. You'll hear more in future episodes. And that's why you don't want to take your finger off the dial. Make sure you're always dialed into Podcast by Friday. That's where you hear the full story. That's where you hear more of our unfolding of the onion. So with that said, guys, hey, have a fantastic day. Go and do something awesome. But the awesome thing is the Facebook group or the email, podcast@podcastbyfriday.com. And the Facebook group is at facebook.com/groups/podcastbyfriday. You'll find all the links in the show notes at podcastbyfriday.com/45. Again, it's podcastbyfriday.com/45. You'll find the links as well as the topics we discuss in the show notes, and whatever else you need to know about Bill or myself, you can find out as well there, or a link to us in other social media platform as well as other places. So thank you again for taking the time to join with us and listening, and for your patience. I hope you learned a lot, and now you had a better way to envision both Bill and I. If you listen to episode 44, you heard Bill interviewing me, so you can get to know me a little bit more too, as well as in this episode you had a chance to know my co-host, Mr. Bill Griggs. So thank you, and we'll see you on the next side of this podcast.